Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. And today I have a very special guest, Lindsay Parker. She is on for the second time. We were just chatting. She was back on in November. We talked about building phases, and that episode did really well. So I was super excited to get her back on to the podcast. But real quick, if you aren't familiar with her, she is known as Lifting Lindsay on Instagram. She is a wife and mother of three. She also has a deep passion for learning and teaching. Lastly, she also really loves lifting weights and fitness. And it's kind of funny that that's in your bio here, because we were kind of just talking about you are homeschooling your kids. So now you obviously get to help them do that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny to have my kids be like, what are we doing for PE, mom? Are we going to be lifting weights? I'm like, of course, because that's pretty much all I know.
So there is a nice little PE class there that's the curriculum, I guess, has lifting weights in there. Any education type stuff in that one too?
I'm really excited to do that with the kids. I think it will be fun to teach them at a very young age. I'm excited to teach my girls strength it's huge. We don't seek out skinny, we seek out strong. And I'm excited to show them that they can, show up mentally and physically strong throughout their lives. So I'm excited to throw it in there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I honestly, when we were talking about that, I didn't even think about that aspect. You could really throw some good evidence-based fitness stuff in there for them as well. So cool. That's awesome. Doing homeschooling again, like we said, that's going to add a lot to your plate. But as far as you, what has anything else kind of been going on in the last few months in terms of your training and nutrition?
Do you know what? I'm actually doing something kind of fun right now. I'm playing around a little bit with body recomp. So the reason why this is fun, because most people are like, wait, isn't that what you're always trying to do? Right. But if I look back on the course of my lifting and really getting into changing my body, I have always noticed the biggest differences when I've gone right into either a solely cut phase or just focusing on a build, especially when it comes to muscle, right? Focusing on strictly just pushing into a calorie surplus. That is really where I've seen the most amount of gains and changes. But I'm constantly bombarded with clients who want to do everything at the same time. And so I decided, okay, as a trained individual, I'm going to kind of use myself as an example, and I'm going to show them what they can expect if they decide to go down this route. Because in my experience, it's a lot slower. And so depending on the mind of the individual, that may actually work against them, right? Because they get bored and they're not seeing changes happen super fast. And so it almost makes them think, oh, this doesn't work for me. No, it does. It's just, you have to give it, you chose a path that you have to give it more time. So if you're going to sit at maintenance and try to lose body fat and build muscle at the same time, because that's what everybody wants to do, or they'll try to sit in just a slight surplus, slight deficit, or some people do really aggressive deficits and they try to do it all at the same time. And they're like, well, I lost body fat, but where are the muscle gains, right? So these are common mistakes that we see in just people not aligning expectations well with the approach that they've chosen. So I have people come to me all the time and they're like, well, and I ask them, okay, so what do you want? What are your goals? Well, I want to lose body fat and I want to put muscle on it. And, they always want to do it at the same time. So I decided, okay, I'm going to kind of use myself as an example. And I work with a company nearby, a DEXA company. And so I get free DEXAs, and I don't preach that everybody should be getting DEXAs. I think that they're very expensive. And I also think that most people don't know how to read them and don't know how to utilize them very well. And sometimes when you go into medical clinics and try to use their DEXAs, they don't keep up with them very well because their entire business isn't surrounded on body recomp. So it's really good to find a company, a DEXA company that their their whole business is body recomp, because they do really, really well at keeping their DEXAs really, I guess, up to speed. They update them a lot. Anyways, so I'm working with DEXA Body, and I went in, got a DEXA. So we're getting kind of a good baseline, but I've done tons of DEXAs with them previously. But I decided, okay, I'm going to do this body recomp. I'm going to sit around maintenance like everybody wants to. And I'm going to see, okay, what changes are going to happen body fat wise and muscle wise. And I'm really, really excited to kind of see the difference after 3 months, because 3 months is what everybody always fixates on, right? 12 weeks to the new me kind of thing. So I'm going to show them, look, this is reality. This is what it looks like. And I'm trained. So if I'm trying to do it all at once, this is what it's going to look like in the end. So I have 1 more month of doing that. And I'm kind of excited to go in and get another DEXA and just kind of say, okay, guys, this is what happened in 12 weeks of me trying to do everything at the same time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because, well, like you said, body recomp is essentially what people want. Like that's the thing. And, you know, I do think there's conflicting views on it. Like, can you do it? Can you not do it? And obviously I think some of the things that people know is like, the more advanced you are, the tougher it is. But it's almost like everyone's always kind of like, you can't build any muscle like when you're not in a surplus. And my view's always been, I think that there is some wiggle room there where if you can really dial in things like your sleep, your training, your nutrition, you know, making sure those things are all in line, I do think that like somebody like you could still see some muscle growth. So I'm really curious to see how that goes for you. Now, you said you're in the 2nd month here of it, out of 3 months. How, I guess for you, what have kind of been some takeaways, and like, have you noticed anything in terms of like training or anything like that that's been a little bit different for you? Or
yeah, and let me just kind of say my opinions on this, because you're right, there's a lot of people who have very strong opinions, and sometimes it's black and white. It's like, it's so like, no, you can't, yes you can. It's just like there's a lot of gray area in between, right? Because the truth is, if you are trying to get body recomp, and let's say somebody like me, like let's say it's a woman with 130 pounds, more advanced, and you know, 5'7", they decide to cut their calories to 1,300 calories and put on muscle at the same time. Okay, well, that's a bit of a, that's a little silly, right? You will see fat loss, but it's really important that as you step into a calorie deficit, the further you step into the calorie deficit, the further away you step from possible gains. And so that's just kind of my belief is I do actually think that somebody trained can sit at maintenance and put on muscle, and there, but how much is always the question. Are they going to maximize their growth? Probably not. Can we line things up a little bit better? Like you said, I think that was great commentary on that, because if your sleep is on point, if nutrients, not just macronutrients, but micronutrients are important. We want to maximize protein synthesis. So I'm not just going to be focusing on protein for the day, but I'm going to be focusing on getting, you know, for me, like 30, I'm a huge protein eater, so this isn't a problem for me, but 30 plus grams of protein every time I eat. You know, there's different things that we can do to maximize one's capability at maintenance to still see muscle growth while minimizing fat gains, or even possibly seeing some fat loss. And you know, if you talked to me a few years ago, I probably would have been a little bit more of the team of no, it's not possible. But the truth is, when we step back and we look at research, there's some great studies out there, and some not so great studies, showing that it is possible for trained individuals. So a few weeks ago, I actually did a podcast on my podcast about, and I quoted some of those studies where these trained individuals saw an increase of, you know, 4 pounds of muscle and a decrease in like 2 pounds of body fat. And that is kind of, and this is where the problem is is, when we're using DEXAs to kind of examine this, a DEXA isn't going to tell you that was 4 pounds of new contractile tissue, guys, right? So you kind of have to look at the training that these individuals were doing. And, the one that I quoted on my last podcast, it was a group of men. And I mean, their volume, I think it was crazy. It was like, I think it was like 32 sets of some things, right? So what do you think is going to happen? Well, clearly there's going to be like, we're seeing a ton of sarcoplasmic, a ton of like uptake of, of nutrients and water retention. And it's like, that's going to be, so we don't know looking at a DEXA, well, that was 4 pounds of new contractile tissue. I don't think so. I think with the amount of volume that they were doing. So anyways, that's me kind of rambling a little too much, I think, on that subject, but I think we can still take a step back and say, is this possible? Yes. And if somebody doesn't want to step into a little bit more of an aggressive build, can we still help them over the long run to see changes while keeping them in a great place mentally and emotionally and physically? Yes. The answer is yes. But yes, we do have to be smart about this approach.
I think too, a couple things that I kind of want to mention on this too, is I think people hear like, oh, you're not maximizing muscle growth. So then it's like, oh, okay, so that means I'm not going to have any muscle growth, when it's like, no, you're still going to have some, right? And it's like, like you said, are you going to maximize it? Probably not. But I think another, and almost that goes back to kind of the expectation thing that you kind of talked about earlier. But also I think, again, it's very important that all those variables are on point. And I think the big mistake people make here is like, and we'll talk about training mistakes later on in this podcast, but that obviously needs to be really geared towards muscle growth too. And I think that's probably where a lot of people go wrong there as well. Their training's not dialed in. But I also think a lot of times, because people are scared of gaining some weight, and that's why you'll probably see people want to go closer to maintenance and do more of a recomp for building muscle, is I also think these people tend to want to maybe push the cardio a little high as well too. And that's obviously something that I think when you're at maintenance, you really have to, like, we have to be so specific to building muscle that I think that takes away a little bit, because they want to maybe do a little too much cardio. Now, I'm sure you feel the same. I'm not anti-cardio for building muscle, but it's like, when you are more closer to maintenance, you probably have to be a little bit more specific to that rather than like adding in extra cardio. I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So a lot of times when clients come to me and they want this approach, we're going to be focusing on more on like not necessarily cardio. Some women just really love it and they can't not do it. So on non-training days, let's say I have them training 4 days a week, and then maybe I'll just do 2 days of steady state, and I usually don't go off of like heart rate. It's usually just kind of monitoring, like, okay, you could carry on a light conversation. And so I'll kind of give them that so they still feel like they're getting it, but they're not going too overboard with it. Not that I necessarily think that the cardio in and of itself is going to prevent them from gaining muscle. It's more of just that we're trying to be a little bit more precise with the energy in. And so, and we don't want too much energy out taking away from that, right? So I will focus on that, and I'll focus on walks. So I'm just like, every single day, instead of doing the cardio, the crazy amounts of cardio that you were doing before, because a lot of them come to me doing crazy amounts of cardio, and that's fine. Just align it with your goals. And if your goal is body recomp, all of that cardio may just be taking time away from other things that you could be prioritizing. So instead, I'll just be like, walking is amazing. And it is so beneficial, in my opinion, just for mind and body. And so I'll kind of do a shift more towards, let's do like, we're not going to be doing high intensity cardio stuff. It's just like lower and walks. If you really want to get out and move, great. Let's walk then. Let's walk.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's where I have shifted my view on it is, like you said, maybe do a little bit of more steady state, but really push people towards that walking, because we definitely still want to stay active for sure, right? And I know that
Mhm.
I think if anything, that's only going to help you build muscle if you can stay, maintain a moderate, at least a moderate amount of steps per day. So I agree. And walking also, I mean, is great because it promotes recovery and it can help with
Yes.
appetite regulation. So I think walking is fantastic, and it's overlooked because it's just like that's what we do every day, and it's more boring than doing cardio. I think too, one thing that's important to note on this is, people hear recomp and they automatically think it's like one way to do things, but you kind of mentioned too, it's like you can also do more like maintenance calories. Like you said, you can also maybe go into that area of like a small like deficit as well too. And that's kind of a potential way to recomp. But it sounds like
Mhm.
you're doing more maintenance calories rather than going into the smaller like surplus side of things.
Yeah, well, I love that you brought that up because actually my first month, because I'm doing this for 3 months, my first month it was so slight. It was just like a 10% calorie deficit. And I did increase my cardio. I was doing more cardio. And I did see I saw the scale move down a little bit, and I was monitoring body fat, and body fat went down a little bit. And I did notice after 3 weeks that I felt like it was going down too quickly for me to be able to be building muscle. So I was leaning a little bit more towards the fat loss versus the building muscle. And so then I shifted it back up. I increased my calories. It was kind of nice because I came in from maintenance. And a lot of times when I'm at maintenance, I don't track. People make this weird assumption that I'm tracking every single calorie that I take in 24/7. And I don't do that. That would mentally, that would kill me. Like that would just, it just wouldn't help me. And I feel like it doesn't help most people, most women, especially, I don't think can stay, not all, but most, I don't think can track 24/7, all year long and stay in a good place, healthy place mentally and emotionally with food and body. I just don't. So I feel like you need to learn how to, at maintenance, you need to learn mindful eating. You need to learn how to read your body and understand its, fullness cues and satisfied cues and all of those things. But you do that in a regulated state, right? You don't do that at the bottom of a cut. You do it at maintenance where your hormones, your energy balance is more regulated. Because at the bottom of a cut, we have these hormonal, they're a little bit dysregulated. And so we do that at maintenance. When I see people try to do that in a cut, I'm like, that doesn't work for most people. But anyways, so I mindfully eat, and I had lost a little bit of like my six pack, which is fine because that just comes and goes. That's a normal part of being a healthy, fit person, is your body fat percentage is going to fluctuate, and that's just normal. So anyways, I didn't have a six pack. So when I went into this, the first like 3 weeks, I noticed that my six pack popped back out. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm dropping body fat at too fast of a speed to actually be contributing to muscle growth. So that's why I bumped up my calories. And then I just barely bumped them up again because I noticed that there was, I was maintaining really well and still even dropping body fat. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to bump them up a little bit more. And so now I'm really maintaining where I'm at right now. And so over this next month, I guess I'm just going to kind of see, can I maintain my leanness while increasing a little bit in muscle? And when I go in for the next DEXA, you got to really make sure that hydration plays a huge role in DEXAs. So I'm going to really make sure that I'm hydrated, my foods are the same, and my training is the same, because people don't realize that training influences what a DEXA looks like too. So there's certain types of training mechanisms referred to as like AMPK or incomplete rest method that increases nutrient uptake and can increase glycogen stores in your muscle. And so right before I did my DEXA, at the beginning of this, I was doing AMPK. So I'm going to be doing AMPK before I move in and do my final DEXA as well. So I'm making sure that nutrition, hydration, everything is the exact same when I go in again, that just makes things a little bit, I don't know, a little bit better. We'll see, a little bit more accurate.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring that up because I do think that when it comes to, anytime you're trying to figure out your body fat percentage, how you standardize it is very important. It's going to throw things off, like you said, and things that you don't even realize. Like I was aware of hydration and, I think also like how much you're eating around that time is going to play a role, but even the type of training you do is going to play a role too. So really standardizing that is important. So that goes back to the importance of like having somebody that really knows how to do that and like get you set up for that can be super helpful. Otherwise, it's just going to be a lot of noise. I think it's the same thing. It would be the same thing as like weighing in daily and one time you're doing it in the morning, fasted, no food or no water, and then you're doing it in the middle of the day with it's just going to give you there's just going to be a bunch of noise. But cool. So it sounds like you were leaning more towards a smaller deficit, and then you were seeing that maybe things were going a little too quickly. You're like, hey, I'm probably not gaining any muscle here, so you bumped it up to more maintenance. And again, like I wanted to bring that up because I do think that's important, because I think people think recomp is just one thing, but there's different layers of recomp that you can do. Like you said, you can almost pick which one you want to prioritize, if it's more muscle or fat loss. What about is there anything that you're specifically really paying attention to besides, kind of your weight, see where that's trending? What like training performance, are you really making sure that you're still like progressing that? And how has that looked for you? Do you feel like you have maintained your performance there with that pretty well?
Yes. So prioritizing obviously progressive overload, like really, really, really focusing on tracking. I think when you've been training for a while, this is just my opinion, kind of what I see from I coach a lot of coaches. So I always think it's funny when people message me on Instagram and they're like, what's the difference between your program and so-and-so's program? Is it's like, well, I write their program. So it's kind of funny, but anyway, so I totally forgot what I was saying with that because I was just laughing about that too much. But it is kind of interesting to take note in how much training does influence this. And the more that you've been, like the longer you've been doing it, sometimes you get lazy and sometimes you stop kind of being as meticulous about tracking your programs and your lifts and okay, am I really progressing this week or over this next, mesocycle? Am I really progressing like I was before? Like it is, you do kind of go through these phases where you get kind of lazy. And so I had to make sure that that I'm being very, very meticulous in my training every single day, that I am, 4 times a week is how often I lift weights, but I have to really make sure that I'm progressing, and it's really making me push too. It's making me push myself maybe more than I was a little bit before. I was kind of getting a little lazy in tracking all of that. So that's one thing that's really huge. And then also with tracking, a lot of times people fixate on the weight. And a lot of times my progressions will be just like one more rep this week. So maybe last week when I was doing like the deadlifts, I was doing like or squats or whatever, I was doing, I have rep ranges. So 8 to 10 reps. Last week I did 8. This week I'm doing 9. So just small incremental changes. This week I'm going to add a 1 count pause to the bottom of my squat. And I'm tracking all of that to make sure that, the work this week is just a little bit more than last week. And a lot of times when we fixate on weight, we can miss out on other ways of progressing too.
Yeah. And technique suffers because you are just so focused on weight. And, definitely want to make sure you maintain that. That's a good point you bring up too about the tracking and like being meticulous. I kind of had the same thing where I was like, man, am I just maybe getting a little lazy with my training? Can I push myself more? And I started to I've always tracked, because I always tell clients or anybody who's looking to take that next step with training, if you're not tracking your workouts, that's the first thing you need to do is you got to start tracking that to make sure that you are, progressing, because that is so important. Because I'm sure you were tracking, but you still get lazy even within tracking. So if you're not tracking, I could totally see how it's just super easy to just get lazy with it. And so I kind of had the same thing where it's like I was tracking, but I was like, okay, I need to start looking back on like other mesos and making sure that I'm actually pushing myself and not just getting like caught up. And that's a good point you bring up, because that is one thing that when you are doing what you're doing, where you really need things to be dialed in, like that's one thing that you can easily start to dial in more and really ask yourself, am I training as hard as I could? And that's probably a thing that people aren't doing, when it's like you can do that without having to go into a large surplus to build muscle. You know, like those are one of those easy, that's an easy to overlook thing, I feel like, there with that you can do.
Yeah. And even repeating past programs that you've done, you can see how far you've come to. I know a lot of my clients don't like it when I'm like, hey, we did this program 6 months ago. We're going to redo it. And they're like, no, I want something new. But I'm like, you don't understand. It's not just about seeing the squat progress. What we do around the squat, like what if you were doing leg extensions before you did your squat? Well, if you do a leg extension, we're going to pre-exhaust, right? So you're going to go into now a quad dominant squat, pre-exhausted. That is going to influence the amount of weight that you can then push on that squat. So even just like how a program is laid out as far as the surrounding or exercises that are done pre that one that you really, really, really want to track and see progressions in, it's all going to influence that. And so sometimes I'm like, I know you don't want to redo this one, but we can see actually really how far you've come by redoing it. And it's kind of cool to watch them go in that first week and be like, wow, like this is really fun comparing to 6 months ago when I did it. And my squat is, you know, up 10 pounds or whatever it may be, right? So even repeating old ones to kind of give you a really good comparison can be great. It can be a great tool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, again, just like to go off of the DEXA, making sure that's standardized. I mean, same thing with exercises. If you're changing things up around it, it's like that is going to influence what you can do. You can't expect to have the same performance if you're doing that lift first or if you're doing it like third or fourth, right? Like that is going to change, but people don't think that. They think that it should be the same no matter when they do it. So yeah, really good points there. I guess for you then, how do you feel? I guess the last question on this is, how do you feel like it's going, or do you feel like it's going pretty well? Have you noticed a change? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so I usually tell my clients, like, don't pay attention too much to your scale at home, right? Because those things are so off. But I was really surprised that my Fitbit scale at home actually was almost the exact same as far as reading body fat percentage, not muscle, but as far as reading body fat percentage as the DEXA. And I was really surprised by that. And I'm using a DEXA because it's the gold standard if you look at it that way. It is going to be, I mean, it still isn't 100% accurate, but it is going to be at least one of the more accurate tools, right? I was really surprised at how close it was with my home scale as far as body fat percentage and even muscle. It was still similar. I was really surprised by that. So I'm now really curious to go back in again and see if what my scale at home is telling me is going to be the same changes as I see on my DEXA. And I don't know, it could be way off. Those things aren't known for being the most reliable. So I'm not hanging everything on that, and I'm not telling other people to. It'll just be, you know, something of curiosity. But so I have leaned down, and the best thing we can really go off of is our lifts, right? My lifts have increased. My strength has increased. And so that's really exciting. And for me, I'm really trying to see changes in my legs. So I want glutes and quads and hams to grow a little bit more. And I have a strange obsession with delts. I want them to grow a little bit more. So I think we all have that obsession to some degree. But I'm excited about the changes I've seen thus far. The scale is saying I'm seeing really good body recomp. And my own examination of my body is that I'm seeing changes, yes, in body fat, but also in muscle. And then we also have the correlation of my lifts are increasing. Like I just added 10 pounds to my no touch deadlift yesterday or the day before something. And so, and that's a huge jump, for somebody who's more trained on a larger lift. That's it. 10 pounds is a big jump. And so like, that's really exciting to see all that. So far everything is showing things are good, but it is still a slower approach. No matter how you cut it, it is still going to be a slower approach. But.
Yeah. And I think just being okay with those expectations, just again, I guess communicating those expectations and realizing that, hey, things might be a little bit slower here. It's just part of the process. But yeah, looking forward to kind of seeing, your summary of it. And I think they'll be really helpful for a lot of people. And I'm sure that you'll kind of do a podcast episode or something like that on it.
Yeah.
At the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Yeah. And again, I think that a lot of people will be able to take this, and who knows, maybe they'll decide, hey, now, this might be the right approach for me for at least the time being. So let's dive into one of the topics I want to talk to you about today. And I know that you have your group programming. I can't think of the name of it. Is it just Lifting Lindsay? So
Lifting Lindsay, I have a training app that it's Lifting Lindsay. But I have different groups. And I think that this is probably the question that you're wondering, because I have a group on there that's fat loss training.
Yep.
And I have a group on there that's muscle and strength training. And then I also have a group on there that's my personal training. So that one is more dedicated towards delts and glutes.
Got you.
But the other two are kind of more of a full body build. So usually the question that I get from more experienced lifters is, wait, why shouldn't you be training the same? Like, why do you have a fat loss group? And why do you have a muscle and strength group? Training should be the same. So I'm assuming that everybody that joins the fat loss group is in a calorie deficit, right? And I don't know what kind of calorie deficit they're in. Some people do their own calorie deficits, and I'm like, whoa, like, how are you surviving? How are you getting out of bed and moving like that? That's like you're barely keeping your organs alive, right? So I can't control that, but I can make sure there are certain types of training that should not be done in steep calorie deficits. So the one that oftentimes that I use the most as an example is mechanical damage, because you don't have the nutritional supply coming in to recover very well. So not only is your recovery going to be really hit, but then also your performance in the gym is going to be really hit. It's going to suffer. It's going to suck. Your sleeping's going to suck, which is just going to affect everything. Everything is just going to go downhill. And it is going to be just a miserable experience. Do some people do that? Yes, but it's miserable. It's miserable. So, and I don't think it's very healthy at all. So, what I do for the fat loss group is I make sure that training like that needs more nutrition to be able to recover well from will never be in the fat loss group. So oxidative and mechanical damage work, that's not going to be in the fat loss group, but that can be a great tool if you're sitting around maintenance for the muscle and strength group. That can be a great tool. We don't spend a ton of time in it, but mechanical damage, we shouldn't be going in there every single time trying to do mechanical damage, but it still has a small role to play in hypertrophy. And so I will have that type of programming in my muscle and strength, but I won't have it in the fat loss. And that's kind of the main goal. Well, and also in the fat loss group, we do spend a little bit more, not a ton, but we will have a few more cycles of metabolic work than we would in the muscle and strength group, right? Okay. Because people are just trying to get muscle. And in fat loss, their main goal is, okay, I want to muscle retention, maybe a little bit of muscle and fat loss. And so, so we'll give them some great hypertrophy, but we'll spend 3 or 4 weeks sometimes doing metabolic work. So those are the main differences.
So when you say mechanical damage, what are we kind of looking at there in terms of like training? I know you said that's not in the fat loss training. What does that type of training typically look like?
Typically look like? Okay, so like pre-exhaust. So if you were to do, I don't know if you've ever done something like it's pretty much mechanical damage is going to make you so sore. DOMS is going to be because you're going to have a lot of tearing, right? So a lot of trauma. So we can achieve that a few different ways. One of my favorites and kind of one of the easiest ways is, I used this example before with the leg extension. If you were to do, so I like choosing hack squat for quads because we can minimize hip flexion and maximize knee flexion. So that's going to really work your quads in a lengthened position, and we're going to have a stable environment. We're going to really overload them in that lengthened mid-range. And so it's just, drop the feet as far down as you can and get more knee flexion, and you can destroy your quads in with the hack squat. But if I was writing a program where I wanted to cause mechanical damage to the quads, I could do that with supersetting, doing leg extension where we kind of pre-exhaust, and then a 15-second rest period, so hardly any rest, and move right into the hack squat. So leg extension, 10 to 12 reps, move right into the hack squat, 6 to 10 reps. And that's going to cause a lot of mechanical damage. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Sometimes these people will write programs and they're like, oh, this one hurt. And it's like, yeah, but you have to be careful who you're writing that for, because that is that is a really fun, and it will destroy you. Do 3 sets of that, rest 2 minutes, even in between, depending on somebody's like cardiovascular capacity. You might need to extend that a little bit more, but women usually around 90 seconds, and then they can go back into another round of that. Guys with more muscle tissue, maybe a little bit less cardiovascular health will extend that a little bit further, but that will cause a ton of mechanical damage. Somebody does 3 to 4 rounds of that, and I'm telling you, their quads for the next 4 or 5 days are going to be destroyed, right? So that's kind of a really good indication, depending on how long you're sore. That's a good indication of what type of training you were doing. And sometimes it's just you are untrained. So anything's going to cause that amount of DOMS, right? But it's somebody who's been training for a while, who's been doing squats, who's been doing hack squat, and then all of a sudden you throw that onto them. And they're like, wow, why am I sore 4 or 5 days? Because you had a lot of mechanical damage there. So that's just an example of mechanical damage. So that type I would not put into fat loss, but I would swap it for fat loss or for hypertrophy. That I wanted more like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. I would swap that, and I would say, let's start with the hack squat, and then we do a post exhaust with the leg extension. And then we're kind of pushing more in a very stable environment, working the quads in a shortened position. And that can really help as far as somebody's not going to be as sore, and that's going to be more sarcoplasmic. So that's going to really help with nutrient partitioning and stuff.
So that would be in your fat loss. So basically in the hypertrophy, when you're again more at maintenance, you're getting enough calories, and you would go the pre-exhaust route. You would do a leg extension to a hack squat. Whereas in fat loss, you're going to switch it around. You're going to start with a hack squat, and then you're going to go into a leg extension and do that. Now, would that be more like metabolic type training as well too, or is that a little bit different?
It depends on the rep ranges that you use for the individual. Like if you're going to be doing like 12 reps for the hack squat, and then doing like 12 reps for leg extension, that's definitely going to be leaning more metabolic. Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
With no rest period between them, and then rest after. Yeah. That's going to be more what I would consider.
And then you said the other type of training that you wouldn't do is more like oxidative. What does that look like? Is that more like cardio type training, or what does that typically look like?
Well, man, oxidative, you can cause a lot of oxidative stress just with the leg extension machine, doing that one, right? Anybody who's done a CAS set with leg extension, where it's just like tons of volume and then you rest. So it's like you work let me try to think of a good way to explain this. So if you sit down on the leg extension machine and you go really, really heavy for, let's say, it depends on the person, but around 8-10 reps. And then, so you go through the full range of motion, and then with no rest period, maybe put it a little bit lighter, and then you only stay in the top half of the range. And then you go back really heavy and try to go through the full, and then go to complete failure. That's like one set. And you only need 2, 3, depending on the conditioning of the person. And something like that with quads, larger muscle group, that can definitely cause an oxidative reaction within the body. So that would be considered oxidative stress. So something like that, those types of things are very popular for fat loss, but I don't think that that's the best place to put it. Stuff like that can be great in hypertrophy and has its place, but only when you have the nutrients to be able to recover really well from that.
Yeah, the nutrient aspect that is super important. I think you'll see this a lot too when people do a lot of group style classes. They'll also try to or CrossFit or something like that. They'll use that to get in shape, when it's you probably need to make sure you have the right amount of nutrients for that type of training. And they'll completely cut out carbohydrates. And it's you need that stuff for that type of training, right? It sounds very, very similar to that too. You want to make sure you have enough energy going into it.
And carbs are huge. Like you mentioned, carbs are absolutely huge for that type of training. When you're in a calorie deficit and you want to keep, protein high so that we can maintain muscle tissue, but we need to be in a calorie deficit, we're going to be pulling from fats and carbs. And so you're just not going to have the nutrition available. There have been times where in a calorie deficit, I'll actually drop my clients' protein and increase their carbs and maybe put them through something like an incomplete rest method. It's not going to be mechanical damage and it's not going to be oxidative, but I'll still put them into a type of programming that does better with carbs, but we have to take it from somewhere, right? And so sometimes I'll for 2 weeks pull the protein really lower ish and at the minimum amounts, and then I'll push up carbs. But you have to understand stuff like this is a little bit more advanced, and most people don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you said, some of this stuff is, I think going in and training and just kind of doing your straight sets, it sounds like that's going to be what it's typically made up of. And it's essentially making sure that you don't go in and just hammer your body when you don't have the calories in. Because I think that, again, I like you said, somebody's going to ask what does it look like? And I think typically people are going to think fat loss training is going to be this super intense style training, maybe shorter rest periods, things like that. And it's clearly not going to be that, but at least most of it's not going to be that.
Yeah, most of it's not. I mean, there are times when I'll take a client, when I'm with them, especially when I'm working with a client in person, I'll take them. And sometimes I'm like, do you know what? Today's just going to be a energy out type of training, right? We're just going to push you. But usually with that, I will still choose maybe exercises where we're overloading more in the shortened and not so much in the lengthened, because that does have a tendency, when we do tons and tons of volume in the lengthened, has more of a tendency to cause more of an oxidative or mechanical damage response.
So as far as kind of programming goes for this too, what's kind of your view on the volume? Does that change at all? And then also relative intensity, does that change specifically for fat loss training?
When I have a client that's in more of a steeper, I have clients that come to me and, it's a 25% calorie deficit, and I wouldn't worry too much about them, but I have clients that they want to do a fitness photo shoot at the end, and we want to get them as lean as they would for stage. Right. So, with them, that is when I would lower kind of RPE and stuff. So, because once again, they aren't getting the nutrients, we're pretty much just looking for muscle maintenance at that point. And sometimes depending on their nutrition, we just have to say, okay, RPE for this is just going to be 8. We're just going to stay like maybe like 7, 8-ish. We're just getting in there, stimulating the muscles enough for maintenance and really not looking beyond that. So, and that's hard for them because a lot of women, they just really love the burn. And so sometimes I will give them a little bit of that at the end, maybe because only mentally, like they don't need it physically, but they want it mentally. And so I'll be like, okay, we'll include like one set where you just push into the burn, but we're going to choose something like a glute bridge where it's just a very, small range of motion. They get that burn and then can walk out feeling good. Right. So that's usually what I'll do. Sometimes volume will bring it back to, if you look at hypertrophy volume, usually people say with reps, it's like 10 to 20 or 10 to 20 sets will do the trick. And with, there have been studies that have shown that newbies 1 to 10 does the trick, right? So I feel like there's so much room to play around with these things. And I'll lower things closer to 8 to 10 sets, but maybe a body part that they want to look really good for the shoot, like delts or glutes. Maybe I'll keep the volume on that higher, but once again, usually doing it more with like cables in the shortened position kind of stuff.
Cool. Yeah. So for the most part, it seems like volume's going to be relatively stable for these clients. And then if they do have like one specific muscle group that they do want to bring up, you might throw in a little bit extra volume there. But again, it's nothing crazy though. It's like you said, it's going to be more like cable type work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I guess that does kind of bring me, is there like would you do any like specialization during this to where you really kind of dial in on one muscle group? Or do you just try to keep it relatively like the same for each muscle group too when they're in the fat loss?
Yeah, it just depends on what I keep saying it just depends on, their nutrition and their mind. And also but if their goals are to, at the end of this fat loss phase, to have their glutes looking a little bit bigger, then I do still want a little bit higher volume because higher volume is going to be pulling in more nutrients. And so we can keep glycogen stores kind of higher in those regions so that when they do drop body fat and they look in the mirror, they're still seeing some, their muscles are still holding a lot in like their delts or their glutes. So but I don't do that a lot because lifestyle clients, we don't have to necessarily worry about all this so much. So one of the things that I love diving into these things, I think it's really fun, but I think, 95% of the population doesn't even have to worry about this. They can just go in and, train smart. I still believe in training smart. I feel like one of the most common mistakes that people make are actually just not choosing optimal exercises. So they go in and they waste a lot of time and then they wonder why their glutes aren't growing, but the entire, like 90% of their program was kickbacks and glute bridges and bands around their knees, like side walking throughout the whole gym. And then they're wondering why their glutes aren't bigger, right? So I feel like a majority of people, if they just chose better exercises, they could see exactly what they want. They could see the changes that they want to see over time. If they just chose that one thing. So leave kind of like the deep training, like obsession, like programming to people who have spent a lot of time studying that stuff and let them worry about that. And if you don't want to hire them, just go in and just choose better exercises. Like I was talking to the sweetest girl at the gym the other day, and she kept telling me about how much she wanted to grow her glutes. And I didn't mean to watch her or judge her at the gym at all because she's just the sweetest person. but I found myself in the same area of the gym. And so it's kind of hard when I'm doing my 2-minute rest periods. What am I going to do? I'm going to kind of look around. And she was telling me about how much she wanted to grow her glutes. And then I couldn't help but notice almost every single exercise that she chose she thought was directed at glute work. And I'm like, okay, so adductors. Now glutes in the shortened position. You literally, like, I've now watched 6 quote unquote glute exercises that are super popular on Instagram that will not build your muscles. Like, will not. So you've now spent an hour in the gym working really hard. And you're going to wonder in 6 months why you're not seeing the changes that other people are seeing. And it's going to be really frustrating too. And so I think majority of people, they need to worry more about their exercise selection.
Yeah, that's a really good point you bring up. It's like we can get caught up in all these little minor details, like how many sets should I do? But it's also like, are you, like you said, exercise selection is huge, making sure you're doing the big rocks there. And like you said, a lot of the stuff that you see on Instagram is not going to do that. I think it just kind of feeds into this, like, just do more, right? And I think that when somebody wants to see that grow their glutes or arms or whatever it may be, it's like, just throw more at it, right? And it doesn't matter what it is, just throw more, just work it more.
Yeah.
And it's like, that doesn't work. Like you said, exercise selection is super important. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And that kind of tied into one of the topics I wanted to chat with you about. So I think that's, like you said, that's probably the most common one there. That, and I'm sure you agree with this too, but just making sure you're training hard enough as well too. That's obviously going to be a big one too there, exercise selection and training hard. If you do those 2 things, you're going to be in a really good spot when it comes to building muscle.
But if you look at it, like when we have these discussions about volume and sets and reps and rest periods and all of these that we're getting now to, like, a lot, it does matter. Those things do matter. But if somebody comes to me and is like, I really want to build my lats, why aren't my lats growing? And they're like, my sets are great, my reps are great, like I'm working really, really hard. And then I look at their back training and all they're working on is upper back. And they're like, wait, but it's called a lat pull down, a wide grip lat pull down. So why aren't my lats building? Well, because most of the load is being carried by your upper back. So we just need to alter now the width of your arms, bring those elbows narrower and closer to the torso, more of like a neutral grip. And now all of a sudden that the sets and the reps and the load matter because it's going directly to the muscle that you really want to build. So that's why I say, like, these conversations of sets, reps, all that is important, as long as we're wise about our exercise selection. So if somebody listens to all of that and then is like, okay, well, I really want to build my glutes. So now I'm going to take all that information and I'm going to put it to work. Well, it doesn't matter if all of your glute work is more adductor work or more hamstring work or more whatever. Like, if your setup and your exercise selection sucks, then that other stuff isn't going to help you.
Yeah, it's almost like, same thing with like fat loss. It's like, you need to make sure you're in a calorie deficit. It's like, you can have the perfect meal time, you can have all this, but if you don't have that kind of base down, it really doesn't matter. Yes. I will say on the back too, that's been one that I've really kind of changed my mind on recently, and it's really been helpful is learning more about, like, is it more upper back? Is it more like lats? Like, that's been really helpful in improving my back training there. And that stuff really does make a difference, because like you said, you could end up finding yourself in a situation where you're just doing a ton of upper back work. And like you said, then your lats aren't, not growing as optimally as they could. Real quick, one last thing on this fat loss training. I know we kind of talked about, hey, like, exercise selection is important. There are just small differences. Do you kind of recommend to people, like, hey, only spend a certain amount of time doing this? And then, like, or is it just kind of what that person like wants? Like, they can spend as much time in there, or do you find that, like, it's probably best to only spend a certain amount of time doing that?
Doing what, like metabolic work or a calorie deficit?
Being more in like the fat loss training, like, do you ever kind of like monitor them and they're like, hey, you've been doing this for like 4 weeks or for 4 mesocycles now, it's probably time to maybe cycle out of this? Or do you just kind of let them decide? Do you find anything there that works best?
Yeah, so they can reach out and ask me. I have a lot of people reach out and ask me. We have a Facebook group, or just Instagram. They'll reach out and be like, "Hey, should I move over to muscle and strength now? I'm around maintenance." And I always suggest, yeah, move on over, because there's some training that they're going to really love in the muscle and strength that they're not going to, like I said, that they're not going to get in the fat loss. So the fat loss one is great for body recomp. It's great for fat loss. But as soon as you're around maintenance, then let's have fun with other type of training too. So that's usually what I do. But I mean, depending on the person, I feel like women just live in fat loss phases, obsessed about fat loss 24/7. And so anytime I can tell them, let's move out of the fat loss group, it's just one way of letting them, like, that's no longer the goal. Get that out of your mind. Step away from that and let's move in to muscle and strength. Let's move into really fueling your body. So anytime I can encourage them to do that, I will.
Awesome. Yeah, I figured it was like, hey, after you've done this for a while, it's like you probably have gotten everything you need out of this, and it's probably time to move into, like you said, muscle and strength. Cool, Lindsay. Well, we've obviously been chatting for about an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. Before I let you go, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or where they can specifically find you?
Just Lifting Lindsay on Instagram, and then liftinglindsay.com. If they have any questions about coaching or training, they can find me there.
Awesome. And that's where they can find out more about the training for the group and everything. Like, awesome. Cool. Well, a ton of great information in here. Really looking forward to hearing how your recomp goes and kind of seeing the final results there. So we'll look out for that, and we will chat with you soon.
Thank you so much.